December 20th, 1944. The small village of Villingen, nestled in the Sauerland mountains of western Germany, was blanketed in the heaviest snowfall in 50 years. As temperatures plummeted to 20 degrees below zero, Margaret Schneider, a 32-year-old schoolteacher, believed the approaching American forces would bring only more suffering to her already desperate situation. She had no idea that before the night was over, her understanding of her supposed enemies would be forever changed. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how, in the harshest winter of the European conflict, an unexpected act of compassion crossed battle lines and revealed the enduring power of human kindness amidst the machinery of war. The winter of 1944 to 45 was remembered by meteorologists as one of the most severe of the 20th century. Across Europe, civilians and soldiers alike faced brutal conditions that often proved as deadly as the actual fighting. In the Ardennes region and surrounding areas, temperatures remained well below freezing for weeks, with snowdrifts reaching 6 feet in height. For the civilians caught between advancing and retreating armies, survival itself became the primary struggle. Margaret Schneider had once been the most respected teacher in Villingen, a village of just over 300 residents. Her classroom, now converted into a makeshift shelter, housed 17 displaced residents from neighboring towns. The village had been largely emptied of men between the ages of 16 and 60, most serving in various military capacities, with many reported missing or deceased on the Eastern Front. "We cannot last another week without more coal," Margaret told the village mayor Heinrich Weber as they examined the dwindling supply in the schoolhouse basement. "The children are already showing signs of frostbite, and Frau Müller's cough is worsening by the hour." Mayor Weber, a man of 70 with arthritic hands that never seemed to warm, nodded grimly. "The distribution truck was supposed to arrive 3 days ago. I fear it may have been requisitioned for military purposes." "Then what do you suggest we do?" Margaret asked, her breath visible in the frigid air of the basement. "There are rumors that American forces are now less than 20 kilometers away," the mayor said quietly. "Some say they will reach us by tomorrow. Perhaps we should prepare white flags." "And then what?" Margaret's voice betrayed her fear. "The propaganda broadcasts say the Americans will show no mercy, especially to German women." The mayor looked at her with tired eyes. "I no longer know what to believe, Margaret. I only know we cannot survive this winter alone." Sergeant James Sullivan of the 276th Infantry Regiment had never experienced cold like this. Growing up in Virginia, winter meant mild temperatures and occasional light snow. Now, leading a 5-man reconnaissance unit ahead of the main American advance, he found himself battling an environment that seemed determined to claim his life before any enemy soldier could. "How much farther to this village, Lieutenant?" asked Private First Class Raymond Martinez, the youngest member of their squad at just 19 years old. Lieutenant Thomas Harrington, their commanding officer, consulted his frost-covered map. "According to intelligence, Villingen should be just 3 miles ahead. We'll reach it before nightfall if this weather holds." "If this weather holds." "We'll be ice statues by morning," muttered Corporal William Jackson, the squad's radio operator. "Intelligence says it's likely undefended," Harrington continued. "Most German units have retreated toward the Rhine, but we need to confirm it's safe for the main column to pass through." Sergeant Sullivan adjusted his frozen rifle strap and watched as Technical Sergeant Robert Chen, their medic, examined Private Martinez's increasingly white fingertips. "Keep moving those fingers, Martinez," Chen advised. "Trench foot we can treat, but if you lose fingers to this cold, there's not much I can do out here." The men continued their grueling march through snow that reached mid-thigh in some drifts. They had been on the move since 4 that morning, with only brief stops to check their position and consume their rapidly freezing rations. Detailed production records from December 1944 showed the desperate state of German supply lines. Coal production had fallen to just 38% of pre-war levels, with civilian allocations reduced to less than 12% of normal distribution. American forces, by contrast, had moved over 143,000 tons of supplies across the English Channel in the previous month alone, including 26,000 specialized cold-weather gear sets that had yet to reach many frontline units. As twilight approached and temperatures dropped even further, Margaret made a difficult decision. The coal supply had dwindled to almost nothing, and the 17 people sheltering in the schoolhouse were sharing body heat under every available blanket. The youngest child, 4-year-old Elsa Becker, was showing alarming signs of hypothermia, her small lips taking on a bluish tinge. "I have to try to find more fuel," Margaret announced to the group. "The old forestry station might still have some coal in its storage shed." "That's over 2 kilometers away through the forest," protested Anna Müller, an elderly woman who had lost her home in a nearby town. "You cannot go alone in this weather and at this hour." "There is no choice," Margaret replied firmly. "We will not survive another night without heat." She donned her heaviest coat, wrapped a scarf around her face, and pulled on 2 pairs of gloves. The extra food she had been saving for the Christmas celebration went into her pocket. She might need the energy for the return journey. "If I am not back by morning, Mayor Weber knows what to do," she told the worried faces watching her prepare. It was an empty reassurance. They all knew there was little the mayor or anyone else could do if she failed to return. At 4:17 in the afternoon, as the last light faded from the grey sky, Margaret stepped out into the bitter cold. The wind had picked up, driving icy particles against any exposed skin with stinging force. She followed what had once been the path to the forest, now merely a slight depression in the otherwise uniform blanket of snow. Sullivan's reconnaissance squad reached the outskirts of Willingen just as full darkness descended. The village appeared largely abandoned, with no lights visible in any buildings. "Standard search pattern," Lieutenant Harrington ordered. "Sullivan, take Martinez and check the eastern side. Chen and Jackson, you're with me on the western approach. Radio check every 10 minutes. "Yes, sir," Sullivan acknowledged, signaling for Private Martinez to follow him. The 2 men moved cautiously through the silent village, their white winter camouflage making them nearly invisible against the snow-covered landscape. They checked several houses and found them either empty or occupied by terrified elderly residents who cowered at their appearance. "These people are scared to death of us," Martinez whispered after their 4th house inspection. "That old man nearly had a heart attack when we came through the door." "Propaganda works both ways," Sullivan replied. "They've probably been told we're going to execute them all." Their radio crackled with Lieutenant Harrington's voice. "Sullivan, we've found what appears to be the village center. There's a school building with smoke coming from the chimney. Moving to investigate." "Copy that, sir. We're about 400 yards east of your position. We'll continue our sweep and circle back to you." Sullivan and Martinez had just reached the edge of the forest that bordered the eastern side of the village when they spotted movement, a dark figure struggling through the deep snow, heading toward them. Margaret had underestimated the difficulty of her journey. What should have been a 40-minute walk had stretched to almost 2 hours as she fought through snowdrifts sometimes reaching her waist. The forest station, when she finally reached it, had been completely depleted of coal. Despair had nearly overwhelmed her until she discovered a stack of dry firewood in a shed that had been overlooked. She had filled her makeshift sled, nothing more than a wooden door from the abandoned station, with as much wood as she could manage to pull. The return journey proved even more challenging, as exhaustion combined with the increasingly violent snowstorm to disorient her. Several times she lost the path completely, finding it again only by locating landmarks she recognized from her childhood explorations of these woods. As she finally emerged from the tree line, seeing the dim outlines of the village buildings ahead, Margaret's strength was nearly gone. Her fingers and toes had lost all feeling, and each breath sent shards of pain through her chest. The sled with its precious cargo of wood seemed to gain weight with each step. It was then that she spotted 2 figures in white, standing perfectly still against the snow. For a moment she thought her mind was creating hallucinations from the cold and exhaustion. Then one of the figures moved, and she saw the unmistakable silhouette of a military helmet. "Americans," she whispered, terror giving her a momentary surge of energy. She had heard the rumors of their approach, but had not expected them so soon. With no strength left to run or hide, and the vital firewood still needed by those waiting in the schoolhouse, Margaret did the only thing she could. She dropped to her knees in the snow. "Please help, I'm freezing," she begged in heavily accented English, learned from years teaching the language to German children. "Please, I need to bring this wood to the children." Sergeant Sullivan raised his rifle instinctively when he spotted the figure emerging from the forest, then lowered it when he realized it was a civilian, a woman alone and obviously struggling. When she collapsed to her knees and spoke in broken English, he was momentarily stunned. His training had prepared him for enemy soldiers, booby traps and civilian hostility, not for a freezing woman begging for help. "Martinez, cover me," he ordered, then approached the kneeling figure cautiously. "Who are you? What are you doing out here?" Sullivan demanded, keeping a safe distance. "I am Margaret Schneider, the teacher," she responded through chattering teeth. "There are children and old people in the school. No heat. They will die without wood." She gestured to the crude sled behind her. Sullivan studied her face in the dim light. Her cheeks were red with frostbite, and ice had formed on her eyelashes. There was no mistaking the genuine desperation in her eyes. "Martinez, radio the lieutenant," Sullivan said, making a decision. "Tell him we've encountered a local civilian who reports refugees in the school building he's investigating. Then get over here and help me with this sled." "Sergeant, are you sure about this?" Martinez questioned, his finger still on the trigger of his rifle. "That's an order, Private," Sullivan replied firmly. "This woman isn't a threat, and there are apparently civilians dying of cold in that building. Now move." While Martinez radioed their position, Sullivan approached Margaret. He removed his outer glove and offered her his canteen. "It's coffee," he explained. "Still warm. Drink it slowly." Margaret stared at him in disbelief before accepting the canteen with trembling hands. The warm liquid was the first hot thing she had consumed in days. "Thank you," she murmured, studying his face. Sullivan was 28 years old, with 3 days of stubble on his wind-burned cheeks and tired eyes that somehow still held compassion. "We need to get you back to that school building," he said, helping her to her feet. "Can you walk?" "Yes, but the wood," she began. "Martinez and I will bring it. Just show us the way." At the schoolhouse, Lieutenant Harrington's team had already made contact with the civilians inside. The scene that greeted them was dire. 17 people, including 6 children, huddled together in one room, with only the dying embers in a small stove providing minimal warmth. "Technical Sergeant Chen, status report," Harrington demanded as soon as Sullivan's group arrived with Margaret and the firewood. Chen, who had been examining the civilians, looked up grimly. 3 cases of severe hypothermia, sir. The elderly woman and 2 of the children. Everyone is suffering from some degree of frostbite and malnutrition. Without heat and medical attention, I don't think the most serious cases will survive the night." Lieutenant Harrington processed this information quickly. Their orders were to secure the village and report back, not to provide humanitarian aid. But as he looked at the faces around him, his own men affected by the suffering they were witnessing, he made a command decision. "Corporal Jackson, Radio Battalion Headquarters. Inform them we've secured the village but encountered a humanitarian emergency. Request permission to provide aid and for medical supplies to be sent with the main force." "Yes, sir," Jackson replied, already adjusting his radio. "Sullivan, Martinez, get that wood burning. Chen, do what you can for these people with our supplies. I'm going to check the other buildings for additional civilians." What happened next was documented in Lieutenant Harrington's after-action report, filed on December 23, 1944. Upon encountering approximately 20 civilians in life-threatening conditions due to extreme cold and lack of supplies, the reconnaissance unit made the decision to render humanitarian assistance. This action likely saved 17 civilian lives and resulted in valuable intelligence gathering regarding German troop movements in the region. What the official report didn't capture was the transformation that occurred in that schoolhouse over the next several hours. As the fire blazed in the stove, Technical Sergeant Chen worked tirelessly to treat the most severe cases of hypothermia and frostbite. The American soldiers distributed their emergency rations and shared their limited medical supplies. Margaret watched in amazement as these men, whom she had been told would be merciless invaders, worked to save the lives of German civilians. She served as translator, bridging the language gap between the soldiers and villagers. "Ask them if there are any more civilians in other buildings," Sullivan requested as they worked. After consulting with Mayor Weber, Margaret replied, "There are 8 more people in the church, including our pastor who cannot walk. The rest of the village either fled west or was evacuated earlier." Sullivan nodded and relayed this information to Lieutenant Harrington, who immediately dispatched Martinez to check on those in the church. Throughout the night, as the storm raged outside, a remarkable transformation occurred inside the schoolhouse. Initial fear gave way to cautious gratitude and eventually to something approaching trust. 4-year-old Elsa Becker, who had been on the verge of losing her battle with the cold, began to show signs of improvement under Chen's care. "She is responding well," he told Margaret around midnight. "Her core temperature is rising, and there appears to be no permanent damage from the frostbite." Margaret translated this for Elsa's mother, who wept with relief and, through Margaret, asked how she could thank the American medic. "Tell her thanks isn't necessary," Chen replied, his exhaustion evident in his voice. "I have a daughter about her age back home in California. I'm just doing what any father would do." This simple human connection, a father thinking of his own child while treating someone else's, seemed to break down the final barriers. Soon, the German civilians were sharing their own stories, with Margaret translating the key points for the American soldiers. Mayor Weber revealed that the local German military commander had requisitioned all remaining coal supplies 2 weeks earlier, promising replacements that never arrived. "They told us to endure for the fatherland," he said bitterly. "How can children endure in such cold?" Sullivan, listening to the translation, commented, "Sounds like officers are the same on both sides, big on promises, short on delivery." This drew a surprising laugh from the mayor, who responded, "Perhaps we common people have more in common than those who send us to fight." By dawn, the situation had stabilized. The main American force was expected to arrive by mid-morning, bringing additional supplies and medical assistance. Lieutenant Harrington gathered his men for a brief meeting outside the schoolhouse. "Battalion has approved our actions and is sending a medical team with the main column," he informed them. "They also want any intelligence these civilians can provide about German troop movements in the area." "Sir, I've been speaking with the teacher, Frau Schneider," Sullivan reported. "She says the last German military units passed through 3 days ago, heading northeast toward Brilon. Approximately 200 men, mostly infantry with a few light vehicles. They appeared disorganized and under-equipped." Harrington nodded. "That matches our intelligence. Anything else?" "Yes, sir. She mentioned a supply depot about 12 miles north of here that was abandoned during the retreat. Might be worth checking for intelligence materials." "Good work, Sullivan. When the main force arrives, I'll recommend you lead a detail to investigate that depot." Back inside, Margaret approached Sullivan as he was adjusting the fire in the stove. "Sergeant Sullivan," she began hesitantly, "I must ask you something. What will happen to us now?" Sullivan paused, considering his words carefully. "The main force will be here soon. They'll bring doctors, food, and supplies. After that, I imagine this area will be placed under military administration until proper civilian government can be established." "And we will be prisoners?" she asked, her voice steady despite her fear. "Not prisoners," he corrected. "You're civilians, not combatants. You'll be treated according to international law. No one here has done anything wrong by just trying to survive." Margaret studied him, searching for any sign of deception. "Last night, what you did for us. The propaganda said Americans would show no mercy." Sullivan smiled tiredly. "Propaganda works both ways. Frau Schneider, we were told all Germans were fanatical fighters who would never surrender. Instead, I found a schoolteacher nearly killing herself to bring firewood to freezing children." "It seems we have both learned something," she replied softly. The arrival of the main American force changed the dynamic in Villingen. Military efficiency took over as medical teams treated the civilians. Engineering units established proper heating in key buildings, and intelligence officers conducted thorough interviews with the villagers. Captain Richard Morris, commanding the company now responsible for Villingen, met with Lieutenant Harrington's reconnaissance squad to debrief them. "Your actions were unorthodox but commendable," Morris told them. "Battalion Command has noted your initiative in the face of a humanitarian crisis. The intelligence you gathered about German movements has already proven valuable." "Thank you, sir," Harrington responded. "Request permission to have Sergeant Sullivan lead a detail to investigate the supply depot reported by the local teacher." "Granted," Morris agreed. "Take whatever men and equipment you need. Report back by 1800 hours." As the squad prepared to depart, Sullivan sought out Margaret, who was helping distribute American rations to the children. "We're heading out to check that depot you mentioned," he told her. "I wanted to thank you for the information." Margaret nodded. "It is I who should thank you, Sergeant Sullivan. Without your help last night." She left the sentence unfinished, both of them understanding the likely outcome. "I have something for you," Sullivan said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small bar of chocolate, a rare luxury he had been saving. "For the children, especially little Elsa." Margaret accepted the gift with a smile. "They will be very grateful. When this conflict ends, Sergeant Sullivan, I hope you will remember that not all Germans were your enemies." "And I hope you'll remember the same about Americans," he replied. The depot investigation yielded valuable intelligence about German supply routes and communications, as documented in military records of the time. More significant, however, was the long-term impact of the events in Villingen during that December night in 1944. Military historians later noted that the American policy of providing humanitarian aid to German civilians whenever possible helped accelerate the end of hostilities in many areas. Communities that expected harsh treatment were often willing to cooperate when shown compassion instead. In Villingen, the arrival of the Americans marked not an end but a beginning. By February 1945, with the assistance of the military government, the village had established a functioning school again, with Margaret Schneider continuing as teacher. The curriculum, however, was notably different from what had been taught before. American production statistics for the winter of 1944-45 revealed the astounding logistical advantage the Allied forces possessed. While German civilian coal allocations had fallen to 12% of pre-war levels, American forces were distributing over 2,000 calories of food per day to civilians in occupied areas, along with medical supplies and fuel. This stark contrast between expectation and reality, between propaganda and human action, became the foundation for new understanding in communities like Villingen. 6 months after that desperate night, with the European conflict concluded, Sergeant James Sullivan received a letter forwarded through military channels. It was from Margaret Schneider. "The children still speak of the American angels who came in the snow," she wrote. "Little Elsa, who you helped save, now wants to become a doctor like Sergeant Chen. Mayor Weber has been officially appointed by the military government to continue leading our town's reconstruction. We have learned much about the true nature of those we once called enemies, and I now teach my students that humanity knows no borders or uniforms." Sullivan kept that letter for the rest of his life. In 1966, over 20 years after that night in Villingen, he had the opportunity to return to Germany as part of a veterans delegation. He made a special trip to the small mountain village, unsure if anyone would remember him. What he found was remarkable. The schoolhouse where they had fought against the cold now featured a small memorial plaque, commemorating the night when compassion overcame conflict. Margaret Schneider, still teaching though now approaching retirement, welcomed him like a long-lost friend. Most surprising was his meeting with Elsa Becker, no longer the freezing 4-year-old, but now a medical student at Heidelberg University, inspired by her childhood memory of an American medic who had saved her life. "Your actions that night did more than save lives," Margaret told Sullivan during his visit. "They showed us that even in the darkest times, humanity can prevail over hatred. That lesson has shaped our community more than you can know." The production numbers and military statistics fade into history, but the personal connections formed during that winter night stand as testament to a simple truth. In the most desperate circumstances, it is often our common humanity that proves stronger than the forces that divide us. The small acts of kindness, a shared canteen of coffee, treatment for a feverish child, the gift of a chocolate bar, revealed more about the true character of supposed enemies than years of propaganda could erase. What began with a desperate plea, "Please help, I'm freezing," ended with a bridge of understanding that spanned decades. In the official records, Villingen was merely one of hundreds of German villages occupied during the Allied advance of 1944 to 45. In human terms, it represents something far more significant, a moment when compassion overcame conflict and revealed the possibility of reconciliation even in the midst of war. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.